Good morning. I'd like to call the December 8th Kankakee County Board meeting to order. Today's invocation via Zoom will be John Featherly.
Thank you, Andy. Heavenly Father, we are meeting, Heavenly Father, we are meeting today during difficult times for our county, our state, our country, and the world as we navigate the hardships of the coronavirus pandemic. We ask that you watch over everyone infected, their loved ones, and the people caring for them. We also ask you watch over our police officers, paramedics, and firefighters. Our faith in you gives us the strength to stay united. It is in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Liberty and justice for all.
And could we get a roll call, please?
Absolutely. Mr. Hess. Present. Mr. Tholen. Mrs. Polk.
Aye. Present.
Mr. Snipes. Present. Mr. Seroy. Present. Mr. Lear.
Present.
Mrs. Weber.
Present.
Mrs. Peters.
Present.
Mr. Payton.
Present.
Mrs. Parker.
Present.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Present.
Mr. Fairfield.
Present.
Mr. Carrico.
Present.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Present.
Mr. Smith from Salina.
Present.
Mr. Swanson.
Present.
Ms. Zakulo. Ms. Zakulo. Mr. Featherling.
Present.
Mr. Dunhill.
Present.
Mr. Miller.
Present.
Mr. Long.
Present.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Present.
Mr. Hunter. Ms. Bryan. Ms. Bryan. Mr. Collins. Ms. Hudson. Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Present.
Mr. Wheeler.
Present.
We have a quorum.
And we have a quorum. Under public commentary, I'll be making a few phone calls. Public commentary is via phone. Instructions were on the agenda. There's 15 minutes in total for public comment. So first up is Kim Bacon from Kankakee.
Hello?
Yes, you're on public comment for the county board.
Hello?
Yes, you're on public comment for the county board.
Oh, okay. I was. I don't have it right ready because I'm looking for you on YouTube and you're not there. So, yeah. Give me just a second. I have to find my written statement. First of all, I'd like to read a friend statement, and her name is Michelle Creasy. Just a second. Sorry. Here we go. Oh, sorry, I wasn't ready. Okay. Here we go. Good morning. This is from Michelle. I would like to express my disgust and disappointment with the county board. I watched the special meeting November 18th, 2020, and was appalled at the behavior and blatant disrespect by several board members toward Mr. Snipes. Each of you should be ashamed of yourselves for your conduct. You are elected officials in a role of county leadership. You should be setting an example, not lowering the bar. Mr. Snipes can be loud and passionate at times, but that is who he is. His voice does have a tendency to carry, but that is nothing new. Mr. Snipes did not once act disrespectful towards any board member. For one member who was not even in the same room as Mr. Snipes to say he felt threatened speaks volumes to his underlying feelings and intention. For the acting chairman to allow this type of behavior and even join in on the disrespect is such a disappointment for our county. Watching that meeting was like watching a bunch of toddlers fight over a toy. The board owes it to its constituents and the county to do better and be better. And that was from Michelle Creasy. And my comment is as follows. With the year 2020 and all of its challenges coming to a close, I would like to comment on a trend we've seen at the county board through the last few months. Mirroring the confrontational intolerance of those on the political fringe, this body has encouraged, engaged, and stood silently by as members championed initiatives unacceptable for elected leaders of our community. The trend began in May when the county board chairman encouraged people to attend a, quote, freedom rally held at the Kankakee County Courthouse, a gathering of hundreds that included those displaying a Confederate flag, and as published on the front page of our daily newspaper, a sign calling for the death of the mayor of Chicago and the governor of our state, a black person and a Jewish person, respectfully. The rancor continued when a board member acting in his official capacity publicly referred to the governor of this state with a personal derogatory comment. He called him a pig. Finally, this community recently witnessed a sitting board member say that he felt his life was being threatened while at home on Zoom, asking for the sheriff's assistance when debating a fellow board member, a board member who happens to be black. There were no threats made. All of these instances are outrageous. All of them raise questions about the ability of these individuals to fairly represent all of their constituents. All of them shine a negative light on Kankakee County as we begin again the work to stimulate our economy and bring in new jobs. We are learning as a community about various types of racism, individual, structural, and systemic. All of these are evidenced by these incidents. I have mentioned, going forward, each of you can accept responsibility to speak up against any form of racial injustice. Please speak up for our community and help us repair the years of horrific treatment of minorities. Help us build a safe and inclusive place to call home. Thank you.
Next is Maya Hendricks from Moments. Sorry. I'm going to call, know what you're doing.
You have reached the voicemail box of...
And try one more time.
You have reached the voicemail.
All right, moving on to Anna DeTillo from Bourbonnais.
Your call has been forwarded to an automated voice message.
We'll try that one more time.
Your call has been forwarded to an.
All right, next up is Jonathan Schinnebarger from Bradley. It's 911.
Good morning, this is Jonathan.
Yes, you're on public comment, the county board.
Excellent. I had a quick question before I begin my comment. I was not able to tune into the stream to hear, but did County Board Member Featherling give the invocation this morning?
This is not question and answer. Sorry, you make a public statement if you like.
Very well. So my public comment is addressing a specific item that I heard Kim Bacon address earlier. This was a quote from the county board meeting on the special county board meeting on November 18th. County board member Featherling spoke to the rest of the board, spoke to the chairman saying, and I'm quoting here, "I'd like to ask if this doesn't become a shouting match, please. Can we talk at a regular tone? I'm feeling threatened and I don't like being threatened." Then Chairman Seroy made a comment and Featherling continued, "I can call the sheriff and have the sheriff come in here because my life is being threatened. I feel as though I'm in trouble." Those quotes were spoken in a context where County Board Member Snipes was speaking loudly about his concerns about the legality of the proceedings and about proper adherence to Robert's Rules of Order. So I'd like to further interrogate why Featherling threatened to call the sheriff in this context. It's important to note how quickly he moved from feeling threatened to being threatened and equated his feeling with fact, especially given that no one threatened Mr. Featherling directly or indirectly. Perhaps Mr. Featherling's conscience affected him because he felt there was truth in Snipes' words and he was complicit in fudging the law, but still the only recourse Snipes suggested was legal action. So since the specific content of what was said was not threatening, we have to look at the way it was said and the person who said it. There's no denying that County Board Member Snipes spoke above a conversational volume when making his points, but this does not break Robert's Rules of Order nor any law. Snipes is a man of conviction and has the right, as do all the members of the board, to raise their voice and alter their tone if they wish to emphasize their words. If Featherling found Snipes' tone too intimidating, he could have complained about this as a point of privilege and asked Mr. Snipes to speak more quietly. Mr. Snipes, being a gentleman, would likely have complied. One further explanation exists, one which I hesitate to make, but it accounts for why Mr. Featherling was afraid, why he perceived this fear as a threat, and why he thought it appropriate to threaten to call the sheriff on a fellow member of the county board. A racist stereotype exists that says that African American people, especially men, are prone to criminality and violence. And as we are all aware, County Board Member Snipes is a large African American man and thus fits within this stereotype. If Featherling was operating based on this racist stereotype, he would naturally think of his fellow board member Snipes as a potential violent criminal. Board member Snipes is, as I stated before, a gentleman with no history of violence or criminality. Yet when he committed the venial sin of raising his voice, Featherling began thinking of Snipes as a violent threat rather than an esteemed member of this board. Furthermore, Featherling's invocation of the sheriff aligns with the way white people who feel threatened by people of color have historically responded. Like a proverbial Karen, he threatened to call the police. Featherling's racist thought process and willingness to threaten another county board member due to a racist stereotype is behavior unbecoming of members of this county board. I was unable to tune in for the beginning of this stream this morning, and Chairman Wheeler did not answer my question. But seeing County Board Member Featherling, who has internalized these racist perceptions, on the agenda to offer the prayer this morning was disgusting to me. I question how a man who has publicly perpetuated racist stereotypes like this can be granted the moral authority to pray on behalf of our county. I suggest the following steps as a solution. I do wish the best for Mr. Featherling, and I suggest that he pray for forgiveness to the God he says we both worship. Thankfully, the Bible says that if we confess our sins, God is faithful and just and will forgive us our sins and cleanse our unrighteousness. I hope that God can create within Mr. Featherling a clean heart and a right spirit. And Mr. Featherling ought also to publicly apologize to Mr. Snipes for treating him with such disrespect and allowing a racist stereotype to dictate how he treated a fellow member of this board. Similarly, former County Board Chairman Seroy ought to apologize for demeaning Mr. Snipes' words as, quote, shouting at the television set. These steps would assist the County Board in showing that it was sincere in its resolution this past summer against all kinds of racism, and that it works to serve all people of this county, regardless of race or ethnicity. Thank you.
All righty, that is 15 minutes of public comment. Moving on.
In past practice, we have allowed individuals to speak.
Are you making that motion?
So I'm going to make the motion to extend the public comment session so that the public can speak.
All righty, Mr. Snipes has made a motion to extend public comment. What is the time period?
We can go an extra 10 minutes.
For 10 minutes. Is there a second to that?
I will second Peters.
Mrs. Peters with a second. There is a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hess. Mrs. Polk. Mrs. Polk. Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Yes, for Polk.
Mr. Lear. Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton. Mr. Payton. Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield. Mr. Fairfield.
Mr. Payton was aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina. Mr. Smith.
No.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Ms. Zakula, I'm sorry, Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Donnell.
Nay.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter.
Yes.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries.
Mr. Payton was aye.
Thank you, Sam. The caller on the call ending in 705, could you identify yourself, please? There is a caller on the line, an 815 number that we need.
Yes, this is Heather Bryan.
Oh, okay. We just had to make sure we knew who was here. Okay. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
No, that's good. Now we'll call your name during roll calls. And we know you're there.
Thank you.
Yep.
Got it.
The next up was Kenneth Wright from Kankakee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to address the board. I must say that from listening to the comments, I'm very encouraged by what I've heard. Since the November 18th meeting, I have been bothered by what I also observed at that November 18th meeting. All the comments, the racist tropes that I believe that Commissioner Featherling was perpetuating. I'm glad to see that other people heard it and brought it to the attention. The disgust that I personally felt from being in the room, from watching Mr. Cyril's at the time, further that and not correct that on the record as it was happening. Mr. Smith mocking Mr. Snipes, stating, referring to him as Clarence Darrow. The other commissioner saying that Mr. Snipes is bullying the board because he was taking issue with some of the action of the board. It's very inspiring to hear the public address these issues. I believe in public service. I congratulate everyone who takes the opportunity to serve the public in whatever capacity. I do not believe in politics. What I witnessed here, what I believe at the last meeting, was nothing short of politics. I believe there were people like Mr. Snipes who would voice a legitimate concern regarding Robert's rules and regarding the legality of certain appointments, and those are issues I believe that members of the board, as public servants and representatives of constituents, should have an issue in. And if they don't know something, like Ms. Polk said, don't vote for something that you don't know. Take the opportunity to learn the issues that are affecting the county. Each of you are represented. You're not here in your individual capacities. You're here as a representative of constituents, thousands of people. When Mr. Snipes speaks, he speaks for thousands of people. And to watch Commissioner Featherling and Smith and Soros further those tropes and mocking of Mr. Snipes and his constituents is offensive. Addition to that, this board acts. A lot of the legalities that this board, a lot of the steps the board takes requires legal interpretation. And I think it's safe, I think it's fair to disclose to the board that a lot of the legal representation that you receive is from the state's attorney's office. And I know that the state's attorney's office as it relates to this board has not acted impartially. I am aware of a situation regarding one of our newest members, where Mr. Hunter, as well as Jim Rowe, has actively tried to talk Commissioner Hudson to take her name off the ballot in order for the chair to retain his position. Now, that's not public service. That's politics. The fact that Jim Rowe and Steve Hunter would ambush this young lady who's trying to be a public servant just like everyone else and try to get them to take her name off the ballot in order for the chair to retain his position, and then only after being unsuccessful with that come here and give legal advice. That's not public service. That's serving a party. That's serving power. We should not be here to serve power. We should be here to serve the people of the Kankakee County. And I believe that all the board members should know that. The board members that specifically that stated that when they're looking for a legal interpretation, they need to know that just like in any other case, when I'm in court, any witness is viewed through the lens of impartiality. And it's clear that what Jim Rowe did to try to get Ms. Hudson, accompanied with Steve Hunter and others, off the ballot so that you can keep Mr. Wheeler can keep his position is just shameful. So when you take that legal advice, knowing that legal advice is not impartial, that legal advice is to serve a person and to keep people in power that are in power. I'm encouraged by Commissioner Peters, who spoke up and spoke of civility last meeting. I'm encouraged by that. And I would encourage all board members to acknowledge each other and speak to each other in a civil manner and not just rubber stamp a scheme to retain, for certain people to retain power. It's not about party. It's not about power. It should be about the people. And I'm glad, like I said, I commend Commissioner Snipes. And Mr. Snipes, I'm telling you, I think you're wasting your time trying to convince this board regarding the legality of those appointments. I believe that your fight should be in the courtroom, and I believe that the statute regarding the state's attorney statute requires him to file this matter in court. And I hope that you at some point decide to take this matter into court. And once again, Commissioner Peters, I commend you. I don't know who you are, but I commend you. I wish nothing but success for the people that are currently on the board, and I pray for the Kankakee, and I pray for the citizens of Kankakee, and I pray for this board to be successful. Thank you.
All right, moving on. No vacancy appointments today. Certificates of appreciation or presentations. I need a motion to go into executive session, please. Yes, imminent litigation, 5 ILCS 120/2C11. So I heard Mrs. Parker was the second.
Second.
Mr. Snipes. That will be a roll call, please.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina.
Aye.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Dunhill.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter. Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson. Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Motion carries. Just a reminder for those on Zoom, there is to be nobody else in the room with you. When we're having this executive session, please think of your home. We are re-adjourning the county board meeting after leaving executive session. It looks like all county board members are still present. I don't think we lost anybody. It's tough on Zoom, but I think so. That's the case. We do not have minutes together for this month. There'll be 2 sets of minutes next month at the full board meeting. But claims committee report. Go ahead, read them in the record.
Mr. Chairman, your Committee on County Claims would beg leave to report they have examined the following claims presented and recommend payment. The clerk is hereby authorized and directed to issue orders to the several claimants for a total of $7,634,521.22.
Alrighty, is there a motion to approve the claims? Mr. Hunter, a second. Zoom, maybe? Mr. Long? That will be a roll call vote if there's no questions.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk. Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina.
Aye.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling. Mr. Featherling?
You're muted, John.
Okay. Aye. Sorry. Is that Kelly? Aye.
Mr. Donnell.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long,
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra,
Aye.
Mr. Hunter. Mr. Hunter.
Yes.
Ms. Bryan,
Aye.
Mr. Collins, Ms. Hudson, Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais. Mr. Smith?
You're muted, Kenneth. You're still muted, Mr. Smith. There you go.
Mr. Wheeler?
Aye. And Ms. Polk, did you have a vote? We didn't get you. I think you're muted. I just have to leave it blank.
Okay.
Moving on. Motion carries, by the way. Under department reports, can I get a motion to combine and accept the department reports?
Amen.
All right, Mr. Hunter, a second. Mr. Eckhoff with a second. Can we get those read in the record, please?
County Collector's Monthly Report for October 2020. Total cash in bank and investments, $1,006,070.03. County Treasurer's Monthly Report for October 2020. Total cash and investments, $1,006,070.03. Coroner's Monthly Report for October 2020. Total calls, 127. Coroner's cases, 19. Autopsies, 6. Toxicology, 6. Donations, 1. Hospice, 67. Referrals, 40. Cremation, 70. 1 X-ray, 2 outside autopsies, 5 pending. Coroner's Income Summary Report for October 2020. Total of $4,472. Circuit Clerk Cash Book for October, month ending October 2020. Total dispersed, $289,025.34. Monthly Building Division Report for October 2020. 115 total permits. Total fees of $40,044. The monthly resolution list for December 2020, total to the county of $31,628.96.
We have a motion and a second. With absent any comment, we need a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes. Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina.
Aye.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Dunhill.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter. Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins. Ms. Hudson. Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Have the consent agenda. Is there anything that needs to be removed? Second time, anything need to be removed from the consent agenda?
Yes.
Mr. Snipes?
Not so much removed, but I have to disclose that Michael Maloney is a nephew, so I have to disclose it because I see his name there.
Is there any other, I guess we would need a motion to combine and approve
Donald.
the consent agenda. Mr. Dunhill, second.
Polk.
Ms. Polk, thank you. If we could get those read into the record, please.
The appointment of Craig Scoffsma to the Clawson Park Drainage District. The appointment of Ralph Parlberg to the Kankakee County Regional Planning Commission. The appointment of Ruben D. Feliciano to the Kankakee County Regional Planning Commission. The reappointment of Maurice Manuel to the Kankakee County Regional Planning Commission. The appointment of Michael Maloney to the Kankakee County Regional Planning Commission.
All righty, thank you. That will be a roll call, please.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes. Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton,
Aye.
Mrs. Parker,
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger,
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield,
Aye.
Mr. Carrico,
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff,
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina,
Aye.
Mr. Swanson,
Aye.
Mr. Featherling,
Aye.
Mr. Dunhill,
Aye.
Mr. Miller,
Aye.
Mr. Long,
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra,
Aye.
Mr. Hunter, Ms. Bryan,
Aye.
Mr. Collins, Ms. Hudson, Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais,
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Going on to highways and buildings, I believe. Yeah. Let's, if we could you get the title read in the record, please? Just the title of the resolution.
The resolution for maintenance under the Illinois Highway Code 21-00000-00-GM.
All righty. So is there a motion to approve? on this one?
Peters.
We'll go with Mr. Hess and Ms. Peters with a second. Without any questions, we'll go with the roll call. This is just paying the bills, I believe. This is paying the bills from highway.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina.
Aye.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Dunhill.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter. Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins. Ms. Hudson. Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Moving on to Section 3, Finance. Our tax levy for 2020. Basically, that's the title, tax levy, year 2020 tax levy request. Would you like to read that in the record?
Stealing my job already.
Sorry. So yeah, it's, I guess we need a motion to approve, and then we can get into discussion.
Donald.
Mr.
Parker.
Donald, second with Ms. Parker. I don't know if Steve McCarty's on here, if there's any specific questions, but this is something we worked out and went through finance last month. Is there any questions about the levy for this year? All righty. Steve is there, okay. All right, I guess with no questions, we can go through roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear. Mr.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
No.
Mr. Smith from Salina.
Aye.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Dunhill.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter. Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins. Ms. Hudson. Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Motion carries. Next item, if we can get that title read in the record, please. Waive the reading.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois regarding the state's attorney's appellate prosecutor program for fiscal year 2021.
Is there a motion to approve on this one? Waive the reading? Mr. Snipes is second by Ms. Polk. Is there any questions about this one? No, pretty something we do every single year. It's assistance from the appellate prosecutor's office for when we need it. And now that contracts are starting, we utilize them for our negotiation teams. Alrighty, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina.
Aye.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Donnell.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter. Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins. Ms. Hudson. Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Moving on, next item. If we can get that title, please, into the record.
Resolution appropriating funds for the payment of the county engineer's salary.
Alrighty, on this one, first we'll start with a motion.
I'll make the motion.
Mr. Hess, second.
Donald.
Mr. Dunno with the second. So is there any explanation necessary? Mark can answer a lot of this, but these...
This is, every year we have to authorize payment of my salary from motor fuel tax funds. We participate in the county engineer's salary program, and the feds pay half of my salary. So this is authorizing those funds and requesting those federal funds to pay half my salary.
And this is a yearly thing, Mark? I just want to make sure.
Yes, it's a yearly thing.
Okay. And I believe this year they recommend the 1.5% statewide.
That's correct.
So any thoughts on that? Any questions? All righty, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina.
Aye.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Donnell.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter. Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins. Ms. Hudson. Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. If we could get the title of the next run into the record, and I'm noticing that there's going to have to be some changes on this.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois regarding authorizing the county board chairman to sign an agreement with Alfred G. Ronan Limited.
I would just note that it looks like the third whereas, it looks like per month is left off, or it is not noted that it's $5,000 per month.
We understand that.
But it has to be cleaned up at the other side. So the price isn't changing, I guess, is the whole thing. I just want to make, so we got a motion for Mr. Hunter to approve. I just want to note that for the record that this will be updated before I sign it with the same fees. And this will go for a 2-year period with our lobbyist who will be working through the whole session. Before we did it for 1 year to see if we were going to do it. Did we get a second? I apologize. No, second.
Fairfield.
Mr. Fairfield, second. Thank you for that. I apologize. The first year, and then we did quite well. We ended up getting $9.5 million in the capital bill on a new project, which never happens. So we are sticking it out. That's the ask here, and let them work with our legislators through the entire session. So that's questions, please, and comments, thoughts, support or against.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Smith.
assuming that we're going to move forward with this, I want to see a monthly report as to what we're getting for that money.
I'm sorry?
I said I want to see a monthly report as to what we're getting for our money. You know, we're paying 60 grand a year. I know you just tossed out 9 million. You believe you brought back. But you and I have had this conversation before. I'm not a fan of this extortion for lobbyists.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Hunter.
Let me ask you a question. Didn't you not indicate that we garnered how much through his efforts?
Yes, we had, well, we've got the new entrance exit for CSL permitted in 6 months, where it usually takes 2 years.
Okay.
On a state route. And then we also got $9.5 million in the capital bill, were the two things we were working on. The next projects were getting bills established and passed regarding the Hopkins Park natural gas pipeline and river initiatives that are currently underway that are just being formulated on the Senate side. So again, those are the projects, and then it's up to the board to determine what our next legislative agenda is, and that process will start in executive committee this month.
Chairman.
So, any other comments, thoughts on this one? Okay, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina.
No.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Dunhill.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter.
Yes.
Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson. Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Motion carries. Under executive committee, if you could grab that title.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois regarding reauthorizing the county board chairman to sign an agreement with the Economic Alliance Agreement.
All right, is there a motion on that one to start with? A motion to approve. Mr. Carrico, motion to approve, and a second by Ms. Polk. Is there any questions about this? Every 2 years, we have to reauthorize our agreement with the Economic Alliance. They act as the economic development arm of the county. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina.
Aye.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Dunhill.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter.
Aye.
Ms. Bryan. Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins.
Aye.
Ms. Hudson. Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye.
Motion carried.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Oh, the opening?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't think I did it. I can do it.
No, I thought you were doing it with Tyler. It's up to you.
I don't think I did, but. Other openings, 3 openings on the Mantino number 9 Drainage District, 1 opening on the Momentum Yellowhead Drainage District number 1, 3 openings on the Momentum Pembroke Union Drainage District number 1, 1 opening on the Raymond Drainage District, 1 opening on the Spring Creek Drainage District, 1 opening on the Union Drainage District number 2, 1 opening on the Yellowhead and Washington Union Drainage District number 2, 8 openings on the Kankakee County Regional Planning Commission, 1 opening on the Essex Township Fire Protection District, 1 opening on the Kankakee Township Fire Protection District.
Thank you. You're probably right.
That's all right.
Can I get a motion to suspend the rules and handle new business first before old business? Is there a motion we can do that?
Sure.
All right, because we want to get through this contract. So we got Mr. Seroy, a second.
Lear.
Mr. Lear. Yeah, I'm sorry, we got to do a roll call real quick.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina.
Aye.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Dunhill.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter.
Aye.
Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins. Ms. Hudson. Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye, motion carries. Thank you. If we could just get the title of this read into the record.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois regarding authorizing the chairman of the Kankakee County Board to sign a collective bargaining agreement with International Brotherhood of Teamsters Local 705.
Thank you. Typically, it's best if one of the negotiating teams makes the motion and the second. So Mr. Hess, and then a second from
I'll second, Mr. Kinzinger.
Mr. Kinzinger. Now we can get into discussion, and there's a little cheat sheet that Anita put together in your packet. It's an overview, basically, of what the only items that are changing in the agreement. So that at least gives you a good idea. You don't have to read the whole thing. Obviously, you can, and ask questions about any part of it with Mark here, or excuse me, with Anita here, and the negotiating team. But hopefully, to save a little time on your part, what actually changed. So do we have any, do you want to give a brief synopsis, Mr. Kinzinger, as the chair or the spokesperson of the negotiating team?
I think Anita did a very good job of laying out the program. I think that Anita and Wes Andrews provided pertinent information, and that the committee worked very well to come up with an agreement that I think is acceptable and workable, and I think all parties should be happy.
Do you agree with that, Mr. Hess?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Typically, that's the board. Obviously, you have a vote always. You can vote yes or no. We've always looked at that negotiating team as having our confidence, and it's always best to do that because we all weren't in the room at that negotiating process. But obviously, vote your conscience. But I would just mention that, and historically, they know how all the wrenches were turned. Mr. Hess.
Thank you, Chairman. And I can't go without saying that the union itself did a lot of work with us also, so appreciate what they did. And Anita and Mr. Fairfield, don't forget him, he was on that.
Yeah, Mr.
also.
Fairfield was on that negotiating team as well. I would agree. The union, we have a very good relationship with our unions here at the county. I will say these days that's something that's been a hallmark the last 4 years. So, and I hope it continues. Any other questions, thoughts about this? If not, roll call vote. Mr. Snipes?
Where's I was looking for You all see the cheat sheet?
Yeah, Cliff Notes, it's the very first page of the, right before the Article 1 page.
Coming out the resolution. Page. Well, I'm sure it's in there somewhere. This is it. Okay, so this is the only thing that basically has changed?
Yep.
Okay, and from your brief narrative, all things that look like went well. Okay, on both sides.
Alrighty.
Roll call.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton. Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina.
Aye.
Mr. Swanson. Mr. Swanson. Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Dunhill.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long. Mr. Long. Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter.
Aye.
Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins. Ms. Hudson. Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Motion carries. Again, thank you to the all those involved. Moving on, have a request for change in our 457B plan operations under the CARES Act. That's something Anita Speckman, our county administrator, will explain.
There were changes under the CARES Act that allowed for withdrawals from retirement accounts with some benefits related to COVID. So it provides, the section we're talking about provides distributions if one, you or your house or your spouse were diagnosed with COVID, or two, you experienced financial hardship from being quarantined or furloughed, laid off, having your hours reduced, or if you can't work because of your loss of childcare or the loss or sales reduction of your business. Unlike a traditional hardship withdrawal under retirement accounts, the distribution, the amount of the distribution or the loan does not have to correspond with direct financial impact of the pandemic on the individual, and the individual doesn't have to prove any financial hardship. The advantages to our employees of a withdrawal under this section is that they can borrow up to $100,000 with no 10% additional tax on early distribution withdrawals from retirement accounts that you do typically. And you may choose to pay taxes ratably over 3 years. So you're not paying tax on the income pulling out of that retirement all in one lump sum year. The due dates of the repayments of the loan could be delayed for a year as well. So an employer can opt into this or opt out of it or do nothing, which is what we're discussing now. And government employers have until January 1st, 2024 to retroactively opt into the plan. So that's what we're asking about now. It really hasn't come up because we've never had anyone ask about it. It was a section in the law that was passed in May. We had no employees asking about it. We've got 3 457B plans that are options to our employees that, in addition to IMRF retirement plans, they can put funds into. As county, we really don't administer them other than to coordinate the deductions from the employee's paycheck and then the remittance bi-weekly with every pay period into the retirement accounts. In this case, we would need to opt into this plan. We did have an employee's spouse call us at the end of November, the day after the spouse was diagnosed. The spouse is the employee. Their spouse was diagnosed with COVID. It's important to note that for the most part, what we allowed our employees that were diagnosed or quarantined, we allowed them the 80 hours or 2 weeks full pay under the CARES Act. We also allowed an extra paid week if, in some instances, our employees, especially in the last month to 6 weeks, the surge, employees weren't able to get a release from their doctor right away. So we allowed for an additional paid week there. We had 8 to 10 weeks off paid in the spring for some employees. So it really wasn't an issue until the end of November. And so what we have to do now is only if we're going to opt in, we have to send to these three retirement providers a form indicating that we're going to allow our employees to make withdrawals under this section of the CARES Act. So the board as a whole can take it up. You can delay it. You have until 2024. If you want to act on it, you can wait and discuss it, send it to the executive. You can make the decision now to either opt in or to do nothing.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, who was that on Zoom? I'm sorry.
Ron.
Mr. Kinzinger.
A question for Anita, as HR and one that's in tune with employees and in tune with trying to keep track of this. Is your recommendation that we opt in or opt out of this particular program?
Well, you know, in terms of the burden to us, there's not a lot other than asking us to track these kind of changes, which quite frankly, and that's why we lost sight of it. You know, we are not either retirement planners or tax accountants up here, and we don't have any on staff. So that's the difficulty when these types of situations arise. For us to track these kind of things is rather challenging.
So I just quickly, did people can access their IMRF? That's what, did it have to be fully vested?
Well, this is not IMRF. IMRF is a defined pension plan. This is for a 457B. We have three 457B plans available to our employees.
Okay.
One is Massachusetts Mutual. I don't have the other two names in front of me, but there are 3 retirement plans that are available to our employees in addition to IMRF.
Okay.
That some employees do contribute to.
Are you able to say, is it, you know, we have, you know, 2% of our employee population that's in this pool? Or, I mean, just a rough number. I mean, is it very
It's a relatively small amount that do make contributions to these alternative plans. Yes.
Okay, Mr. Snipes.
Thank you. It will be my recommendation and a motion that you commit to send this to the executive committee, because I don't like to make rash decisions with individuals who have retirements. I think that it needs to be thought through, looked at, some input, and so therefore I think this would be better addressed to the executive committee, and then they can send us a recommendation back as to the overall consensus. So I would like to make a motion that we send this to the executive committee to be discussed further.
Is there a second to that motion? Mr. Siroy. Any comments about the motion to refer to executive for consideration? Okay. One question, does anybody think it'd be more appropriate in finance than executive? Because that's usually where we talk about insurances and things like that. I'm just curious if that would be an appropriate amendment or if we want executive to consider this. So it's not necessarily policy, it's you know.
Mr. Chairman?
It's just a thought.
I can move to finance. I mean, I can admit it to move the agenda to both. I mean,
finance then their recommendation
finance
to
and
executive.
Yeah.
Is that okay with the second, Mr.
Yeah.
Searing?
I was just gonna make a comment that the docket for executive is a little shorter than finance, and then, so discussion could go deeper in the executive session than in finance, just because of the docket size, so. That's why I agree.
Leave it the way it is?
I agree.
Leave it the way it is?
You know.
Okay, so the motion is to go to executive then, okay. We have a motion and a second, we're good?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
Mr.
Mr.
Chairman?
Hess. I have Mr. Hess and then Mr. Lear.
We could put it on both agendas. If we do it on the executive, it would be on the finance for the next day. But
Actually, this month they're both on the same day. I just thought of that, didn't I?
Yeah.
6 of one, half dozen another.
I mean, you could put it on both agendas. If we make a resolution or whatever we want to do on the executive, we don't have to do anything with it in finance.
Or vice versa. Yeah, because we'll have finance first on whatever day it is this month because of the holiday. We're having them both the same day. So, yeah, that makes sense. Alrighty, we have a motion and a second.
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, Mr. Lear, sorry.
Thank you. Anita, are there any downside to employees if we delay this a month?
I can't answer that question. I would say it would be probably pretty limited because we've only had one request for this. Although I will say that at the point in time when this employee's spouse was diagnosed, the employee's spouse was calling us every day asking for it. So if somebody is concerned about getting the money quickly for some reason, that's your only downside.
Thank you.
Sorry, this is Nancy. It appears the CARES Act may be limiting those disbursements. It's saying that a coronavirus-related distribution on an eligible retirement plan to a qualified individuals would be from January 1st of 2020 to December 30th of 2020. So I don't know if it would impact when they were allowed to make the disbursements, because by the time we would go through committees and bring it back to full board, we would be outside of that December 30th date. I don't know how they're going to do that. I don't know if new legislation will address that. You know, those are all unknowns we're dealing with. But just so you're aware, I'm not sure how that date will impact the employees.
I did read part of that, Nancy. That I don't want to, but and what it talked about was I went into a tax accountant's take on this, and what they were saying is you would have to somehow, your tax accountant would refile your taxes somehow. So that would be something, right? The employee would have to do.
Right.
That's the downside of this, is the issues that it gets into tax accounting and estate planning that we really don't have the expertise on this floor to do.
Right. And once again, this whole ability of whether or not to withdraw from the 457B accounts, all on our end, we have to do is adjust our, let our plan providers know that we are going along with this. Everything, the withdrawal, the implications, all of that, that's on the employee to deal with. They have to deal, like Anita said, with the tax consequences. They have to deal with paying it back. They have to deal with requesting the money, showing that they, any of that. They have to do that. We're just altering going along with compliance, or not compliance, we're just going along with what the CARES Act provides.
So did you, Anita, you said it was retroactive, so if we did pass something this month and then did it in January, they could still get a distribution, but they probably have to refile their taxes.
Well,
potentially,
in all likelihood, they would get their distribution in December, because Nancy's right. The distribution has to be made in December, before December 31st, the way the CARES Act states it now. And then what would happen is it's a tax implication. So between now and when they file their taxes, the employer government employers have until January 21st of 2024 to change their plan documents for this. So what that means, if you're past April 15th of this year and your employee has taken a distribution and filed their taxes appropriately for that distribution, if we opt in a year or 2 years or 3 years, we would have, that employee would have to go back and refile their taxes or follow the advice of their tax accountant on how to account for that.
Because one of the things the CARES Act allows on your taxes, if you would take, let's say, $9,000 out for the coronavirus related distribution in 2020, you would normally have to pay that $9,000 all at once. And what they're allowing employees to do is, if they would take that, is, for example, to divide that $9,000 over 3 years. They have 3 years to pay of the taxes that would come on that payout. So that $9,000, for example, they could pay $3,000 in 2020, $3,000 in 2021, and $3,000 in 2022. So what it does is it alleviates some of the implications that could have kind of serious impact on their taxes right away. And it also deals with, interest and paying back. And so they've kind of adjusted it to allow this. And they've also, I think the amount, Anita, was maybe 50,000, and now they've raised it to 100,000. So they've kind of made it be a little more, I guess, employee friendly, in the fact that you can still be working, because before you would have to not be working, or you'd have to, like Anita said, meet certain criterias to be able to withdraw from your 457B. So they've made it easier to withdraw, and they've made some of the implications and some of the potential what would be seen as penalties a little easier for the employees to work with. According to the IRS website, question 4 says, what is a coronavirus-related distribution? And the answer from them is a coronavirus-related distribution is a distribution that is made from an eligible retirement plan to a qualified individual from January 1st of 2020 to December 30th of 2020, up to an aggregate limit of 100,000 from all plans and IRAs. So I don't know if the employees would be able to take a distribution of their 457B after that December 30th date. We'd have to wait and see what comes out from any other acts or laws or.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Was that
This is
Brian?
Heather Bryan.
Yes.
May I speak?
Oh, yes, please, go ahead.
Okay. A 457B is a retirement plan that the employee has made the contributions to. This is, in essence, their money. So they have a pension already. This is in addition to their pension. So if this person wants to access their money, all the penalties will fall on them. When they retire, they'll have a little less money, coming from this account. This is comparable to a 401k. So if they err in dispersing their funds prior to retirement and not letting the funds mature, I think that would be their decision for them and their financial planner, and I'm of the opinion that we should allow this.
Mr.
They may have a family emergency or something that they need to deal with.
Mr. Hess, second time? Yeah.
Comment, or going to be my comment. If it's going to benefit the employee, and we need to have it done before December 31st, I make a motion we move on this now.
We actually have a motion on the floor. So the only way to do that is if they withdraw their motion in their second. And if that fails, then we can make another motion. Does that make sense? Sorry, yeah, and just so you know, I was gonna vote no on the motion, because I think we should pass it now, but that's just my own opinion. It's not because I don't agree that the county board should discuss it, but it's not our money, there's no contribution.
Considering that, my thing was, when we're looking at doing it for one, I always like to get the whole, that's all, everybody that's involved in that process and hear from them. But if time is of the essence, I can withdraw that, but again, continue to look at it so we'll know we'll be in a better position because I guess this is coming down the line, and we can also get the other end of that is people will rationally go in and just draw it, and then all of a sudden come to the county and says, you know, you allowed them to draw this because I was sick, and now I have nothing. So I mean, it's one way or the other, but I mean, I agree, it is the employee. They do put the dollars up in there. There's a safeguard. My thing was, I was thinking,
you withdrawing your motion?
well, I was thinking that you was going to discuss it this month, and then they was going to make that recommendation. But I can withdraw the motion, and we can move to just go ahead and approve it.
I will withdraw my second, but I also don't believe in payday loans. So I just am leery of the same reason Mr. Snipes is to allow employees to just draw a hunk of change out of their retirement without thinking about it thoroughly. So.
Sure, and so if you're withdrawing the motion and making a motion in a second to approve now, with steering the employee towards where the education is for them to make the decision for themselves.
Yes.
Because this isn't our decision.
Right.
It's just allowing them to make their own decision.
Make their decision.
Does that make sense? Okay, so did everybody understand the motion to approve, and they will have access to the information? Some of it, from what Anita says, is not available yet. So there will be some decisions made, you know, whether they extend this going forward, other things that have to be supplied in the future that they'll get updates on. So that's the motion in the second.
Yes.
Any other discussion?
Mr. Chairman, Ray Fairfield?
Yes, sir, Mr. Fairfield.
I was just wanting to check with Anita. Is this going to be an undue burden for her and her staff? Is she going to be able to handle this if it comes past?
It's not, I would say it's not huge. It's for me, it's just going to be a communication. It's going to be researching which employees this applies to and getting communication to them to speak to their retirement planner to see if they want to take advantage of that. That's really it, other than setting the expectation that I'm somehow going to track these sorts of retirement changes in future, which.
Right.
No, just let it, my point was letting them know that they need to watch this. This is their choice, and there's the monitor, because it's not a county sponsored plan, if you will, or contributory plan.
Thank you.
All right, we're ready for roll call. Let's roll.
Mr. Hess.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters.
Aye.
Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield.
Aye.
Mr. Carrico.
Aye.
Mr. Eckhoff.
Aye.
Mr. Smith from Salina. Mr. Smith.
Looks like he's frozen.
Mr. Swanson.
Aye.
Mr. Featherling.
Aye.
Mr. Dunhill.
Aye.
Mr. Miller.
Aye.
Mr. Long.
Aye.
Mr. Kirkstra.
Aye.
Mr. Hunter. Ms. Bryan.
Aye.
Mr. Collins. Ms. Hudson. Mr. Smith from Bourbonnais.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Motion carries. You've all got the announcement for the 2021 board meeting schedule. Everybody got that?
What's the change, though? You said it's going to change?
Yeah, in December of 21, the Finance Committee meeting. It'll be updated on your automatic calendar that goes to your phone. But we settled on what you have printed. We changed the Finance and Executive were on the same day, but we moved it to the 23rd. So everybody could be off the next week, Christmas, all through the next week, no meetings. That was the only change. Yep, accordingly. All right, now we can go back to old business. Is there any old business?
I got some new business.
Oh, some new. Okay, please.
I was talking with Mr. Hunter before the meeting. I think that we have to have a proclamation made for the East Side Bulldogs for winning the championship. We've done that for other victorious teams and that.
We'll add that to executive, for sure. Unfortunately, they won't be able to come in and do it, but, because that's part of the,
maybe
the deal.
coaches or representatives, just gathering the president or somebody else, head coach of the varsity team.
Yeah, that might be good, if we could, because we're limited on space in here, but if we can get one of each, a coach and a player, maybe that might be okay. We'll check to make sure that falls within guidelines, but I don't see a problem as long as they're not staying 6 feet within each other.
We've done it with many other sports teams, and they're very deserving.
I agree.
For it, so.
I would agree. All right, so that'll be added to the agenda. You got that one. Okay, any more new business? Going back to old business. Any old business to consider to discuss? If not, I guess is there a motion to adjourn, Mr. Hess?
Mr. Chairman.
And is there a second to that motion to adjourn?
Peters. Larry was trying to get on.
Mr. Kirkstra, did you say something? I'm sorry, you called out.
I got beat out, that's all.
We need a second. Are you the second?
I will second.
All right, all right. We have a motion and a second to adjourn. Roll call. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Have a good day.